Well, good evening, friends. It's another White Noise. This is a discussion that helps me understand things from a white perspective. We have educator Jay Wamsted, who is in the great state of Georgia, who is going to help me tonight discuss and unpack this new New York Times serial podcast called Nice White Parents. And it, I have seen it popped up everywhere. And I, bit the bullet because you asked me to, Jay, and went and listened to it. And it made me, it gave me all kinds of feelings, lots and lots of feelings. But anyways, let's start with it. You listen to it like I do. What's your immediate takeaway? What about it is new to you? And what about it to you just confirms things that you already know?
So, what was new was the depth of it. Just that so it's like, and it gets more into this as it goes on, but that it goes back to 2015 in that first episode, but now it's going to go back to the 60s or something on the second episode. And so that is super exciting. So that was really new. It was just comprehensive from both sides. I've been kind of studying the white savior for a long time. I sometimes like to call myself a reformed white savior. And so to really like kind of see that happen and then have all these interviews from both directions with the white saviors who maybe didn't know they were white saviors and with the people that were being saved, as they say, against their will. So that was really fascinating.
I think that's funny. Saved against your will. I don't want no saving. Don't save me. So, the podcast starts out with the journalist talking about a box of letters, or a whole bunch of letters that she had a chance to look through. These letters were from the 1960s to a local school board, and they were asking that a school not be placed directly next to the projects, because that would mean automatically that school would just have all poor kids and kids of color, and they wanted a diverse school. So they said, build it closer to us. It's like the opposite of NIMBYism. They were like, no, bring it to us. And by the way, we don't want our white kids to have just some white school. We want them to have a diverse learning environment. So she reads the letters, and then she contacts all the people who wrote those letters, and not a single one put their kids in the school. Right. Even though they lobbied hard for it. They lobbied the school board. They won. They got the school board, yielded to them, because, what school board is going to say no to a bunch of white parents saying, hey, we actually want to voluntarily integrate a school? So when I ask you, like, what confirms what you know already and what you think is new, that's the part I'm thinking about, is no one showed up. They lobbied for it and then didn't show up. That to me was a little, as cynical as I am, was a little shocking that they would do that much organizing to get the school. It got there and they just didn't do it.
Yeah. So, so that just gets at like this core sense of what it is to be, sometimes to be a white liberal, which is we know the right thing to do and we know the right thing to say. And at the time we say and we do it, we believe it. But oftentimes our actions don't follow suit with what we say. I was Googling around today, and I just saw this Education weekly research article about, I'm going to read you the title just to make sure I get it right. It says, the title was, "White Parents Say They Value Integrated Schools, period. Their actions speak differently." And then it went on to this big study they did in, I think it was North Carolina and some other state, about white parents and all that they say about what they want about integration, and how they want their kids to go to diverse schools, and they want their kids to go to schools with children of color, and then they consistently choose other. So what happened in the 60s is still happening today. Differences in between. I guess we've had a lot of research about it, I guess.
What was interesting was I jumped out of I listened to the podcast. I jumped out. I pulled up a couple of research papers, and it was around fundraising, white parent fundraising in urban schools. And I found a really good one. And I should have actually pulled it up for here, but it basically talked about how a lot of what we think are the benefits of an integrated school actually fall apart when white cliques come together in those schools and start demanding things like tracking, separate immersion programs, separate islands, and even in the case of this school that was on the podcast, separate PTAs even.
Yeah.
Made me think my school has more than one PTA.
Oh, really?
It's got the white people's PTA and it's got a kids of color or people of color PTA.
No way.
Yeah, which is mostly, I want to say, a Somali families. I think maybe there was talk of merging them at some point, but doesn't that, strike you as odd?
Yeah.
Even here in nice Minnesota, we're Minnesota nice. Even in good old nice Minnesota, we have separate PTAs.
Yeah. So the way that unfolds throughout the episode is kind of fascinating about how this, the white parents come in. So maybe we should back up and should we set the scene of how this school?
Yeah.
So what you're saying about the 60s is happened, and that hasn't actually been talked about a lot in the podcast so far. They're coming back to it. Instead, they're starting in 2015, when the school is 50 years old, and it is a mostly black school. And this group of white parents that are in the neighborhood decide kind of en masse to move in. And so I think the numbers were that they had 100 slots open for 6th grade, and only 30 slots were filled. It was an all black and brown school, but it was just shrinking. And so something like 70 white families got together and all at the same time made the decision to come in. And the way they got in was they created this French immersion program or something. I don't know what it's called, but it's a French immersion program. And then they got all their white kids in here. So the school is entirely black and brown from 12th grade on down to 7th grade. And then there are 30 black and brown 6th graders and 70 white 6th graders. And they're all in the French immersion program. And then the parents start to raise funds for the French immersion program. And that causes this split where the traditional PTA, which is led by black and brown parents who had been there for years, is doing one thing, and the white parents are doing something totally different. And I was shocked by that. And you are not shocked by that at all, are you? Because that's what your life is like.
No, and it's it's something that I didn't know about before I was on the school board. But once I was on the school board, I saw how organized parents can be, white parents, and they make real demands. So when we were thinking about changing the way that we enroll kids in schools, or changing the bus routes, or changing the boundaries, or anything like that, they would make straight up demands of us. Probably a few people listening or watching who are from the Twin Cities here probably remember, they really said to us, if you're going to move us, you can't disperse us. Mm-hmm. So we have to move as a cohort. So all the white, everybody else, we could just change bus routes and stuff. But the white families were basically telling us, you have to move us in mass together.
And this is when you were on the board still? Is that what you said? Okay.
And I'd never seen anything like that. It was just straight up no, you're not going to move us from one school to another without our consent. And we'll only consent if you move us together, because we don't want our kids being a minority in the schools that we go to.
Right.
And it's wow, but you're okay with our kids being a minority in the schools that you guys, well, yeah, because then that's diversity. That's integrated. Right. That's diversity.
Yeah. And that was a fascinating thing she talked about the use of, she interviewed some upperclassmen students who were black and brown, and they were talking about diversity, and they meant the white kids. And then she interviewed the parents, and they were talking about the diversity, and they meant the black and brown students. And it was, but they meant it they were talking about each other, but in a very one of them was complimentary, one of them wasn't, kind of.
What I thought, what I found kind of interesting too, was when they talked about the bliss point.
Yes, I wrote that down.
So for people listening, the bliss point was the number of white people you have to get into a school before white people feel comfortable coming to that school.
Right.
So we should talk about a couple of thresholds, or at least I don't know, we have to talk about them, but I'll just bring it up. A couple of thresholds.
I was going to say, do you remember the number? I'd be curious, anybody out there, if
26%.
Yeah.
So she was saying that at 26%, white people, when they're 26% of the population of a school, more white people will feel comfortable coming there now. So that's the bliss point. So principals and others want to push past the bliss point so that they can have social capital and have those people in the building who will raise money and do other things for the school. But there's two other thresholds that I should put on the table. So there's the bliss point, that's one by itself. Two others. One is there's a point at which a school tips over. So those white parents start discovering a school, and their friends or neighbor are going to it. And eventually it's gentrified. So a school that had been for kids of color, mostly all kids of color, where they had some modicum of power and the programs were for them, find themselves displaced all of a sudden. So people move into a neighborhood. They decide together, separately, that they're going to all go to the school, make a good show of it, and then they get there and it becomes an all-white school. So that's another tipping point. The other tipping point is when schools are white and Black kids come, kids of color come, there's a tipping point at which white families start to flee. So I forgot what that is. It's in research. It's not very many. I think it's like 30%. You start getting to 35% Black kids, and white families start dropping off. And then that school eventually becomes segregated.
And that's like directly related to the research numbers they've done on white flight and housing patterns in the 60s and 70s, when the neighborhood's all white, all good. One Black family moves in, maybe we're all right. 2 Black families move in, 5 Black families were done, and it just like it collapses. I don't remember the number either, but it's shockingly high. It's like when all of a sudden the neighborhood becomes 85% white parents start freaking out and leave instead of, it used to be 100% white, now it's 85, and they start to freak out. And that's pretty well documented.
I was interested in, as I was listening to it, that I feel like I'm gaslighted with the integration conversation, mostly because a lot of times people who are accusing me of being for segregated schools, or accusing school choice as being a scheme to segregate kids, or just that kind of general narrative that's very political. It's from people who are very much like the people in this podcast.
Yes.
People who virtue signal, talk a good game about integration and all that stuff. They've forwarded Nicole Hannah-Jones to everybody that they know a million times over. She's their patron saint, and she makes them feel good. She gives them license to feel good just by forwarding her stuff and saying they're for integration and accusing people like me of being against it. But then their actions, right? Like if we judge people not by what they say or what they do, not what they say and
right.
or the color of their skin or any of that, but you can judge people in their actions. And their actions, like New York City is one of the bluest cities in the country.
But also one of the most segregated school systems in the world. In America,
the most in the United States, the most segregated school system, but one of the bluest cities ever.
Yeah.
I don't understand how people reconcile that for themselves in their politics.
I don't know. There was a word. It felt like a dog whistle, not a dog whistle the way we use it about 45, but a dog whistle the way, like I heard it as a white savior dog whistle. At some point in the episode, the main white character, his name is Rob, if I'm not mistaken, and he is the main fundraiser, and he's kind of the prime mover of everything. And he's not there in a meeting, and someone else a white person describes him to a room full of color, describes him as well-meaning. And that word just leapt off the headphones to me, because like that describes so many white people. We are very well-meaning, we are very well-intentioned, we have all the good ideas and graces in the world. And I'm not talking about everybody. Obviously, there's a lot of like nasty white people, just like there's nasty Black people and nasty people. But liberals are very well-meaning. But we don't follow. And then New York City is a tremendous example of that. I wanted to ask you a question.
Sure, ask me a question.
I read some pretty fierce, like conservative pushback on this, but I did read one. It was pretty liberal pushback. I don't even remember what it was, where the writing was. But one of her objections to the piece was that it rested on what she called assumptions that rest on shaky ground. And the first assumption that she states, this is the writer, I cannot remember her first name, so I'm not even going to try to say it. But she says that the podcast rests on the assumption that, quote, the most effective way to close the gap in achievement between Black and white students is integration. And so, it did hit me, because I was like, oh yeah, the whole podcast is predicated on that. And I went back and listened to it again, and the journalist Jaffe Walt says that very explicitly. She said, this is a quote from her, the most effective way to close the gap in achievement between Black and white students is, and it's something like obviously integration or clearly integration or demonstrably integration. It's like, and I was wondering how you felt about that, because
when she said that, I actually caught it right away.
Okay, I didn't catch it the first time.
Yeah, she said New York public schools were really interested in this because it wasn't often that parents, really fought the district to integrate, and knowing that it has been proven to be the best way to close the achievement gap, they were all for it, or something like that. And it dropped like a thud to me. It was just like a brick. I wish people would stop saying that. I wish journalists would stop taking Nicole Hannah-Jones' word as gospel. I wish they would acquaint themselves with kind of a wider range of theology when it comes to their politics and how they write. Because it's just not true, for one. And I do want to say this is what's going to be ironic to me about all of this. This is actually the most racist podcast I've listened to in a long time, that people are going to listen to and not know that it's racist as hell, right? All of the assumptions underneath the bottom of it have white centeredness and white supremacy and white power and white intelligent superiority as the central basis for the story that's being told. And everybody who listens to it is going to see themselves as part of that white centeredness, and they're going to think this is absolving them of something, and it's not, right? And I think even what Nicole Hannah-Jones is selling to all you guys that are white is really a racist idea that I've told her is a racist idea, which is predicated on proximity to white people is the only saving grace for Black students. Like, proximity to white people is the one thing that'll cure them, the only thing. And imagine if you're white and you believe that. If you believe that other people, that othered people, the people that I've othered in my own history can't live without me. They can't have a good school without me. That pedagogy doesn't work with them without me. Teaching doesn't work with them without me. It's so insulting. It is just so insulting.
And their buildings are blessed by my children. I mean, that is the underlying rhetoric of that. Let me offer. Yeah. I want to come back to it, because that sentence you just said about being a racist podcast, I want to come back to it, but I want to just interrupt with a counterspin to that. So I, for a long time, have taught in a neighborhood in Southwest Atlanta that was historically a white suburb until the 60s, and then Black families started moving in, and then it was entirely abandoned by white families, and then for 20 or 30 years was the center of the Black bourgeois in Atlanta. I mean, like, Hank Aaron lived there, Shirley Franklin lived there, Maynard Jackson lived there. I mean, like, it was where, if you were Black and middle class or above, you lived there or strove to live there. And since has fallen on hard times and is now kind of hollowed out a little bit. And I became really interested. Kevin Cruz, the historian, actually used this neighborhood as a case study in his book White Flight, where he talks about several Atlanta as a whole and as a demonstration of what happened in the whole country. And I read his book kind of by accident and became really interested in my neighborhood. And so what I'm coming to the point that what struck me so forcefully was that 1954, Brown happens, and Atlanta. I'm just talking about Atlanta because I know more about Atlanta than anywhere else. Atlanta drags its feet on integration, like much of the South. We start to integrate our high schools 7 years later with like 4 students. But we're Atlanta. We're like, the new South capital of the South. And so we do it successfully and we spin it well. And, but it was not so much the argument of White Flight is not so much that these neighborhoods hollowed out because Black people moved in, but because Black people moved in and now had the legal right to go to school with the white children. So the white families left, not just because they didn't want to live next to a Black person, they didn't want their child going to school with a Black person. Now that's equally racist. But it's equally, I'm not defending that. What I'm saying is I think there's space for a certain kind of white person who, and that history was duplicated all over the nation, especially in the South and in different ways in the North with the historic redlining and the Great Migration and all that. But there's a certain amount of white person that wants integration because we want to make good on that terrible moment in history. So 1954, something really like good happens finally in the civil rights. I mean, not finally in the civil rights movement, but like something like shiningly, demonstrably good happened, and white people ruined it. And now I think there is some motive to try to make good on that. That's separate from what you're saying about like, oh, my presidents make things better, oh, my children make things better, oh, white people make things better. I think that is part of it, but I think there's some white people that just like, we just want to fix what went wrong in 1954. And so I want to posit that to you as a possibility for some nice white people.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think that's fair. I don't know any way of like having any evidence where I would dispute that or be for it or say it's true. So
I can't prove it either, right?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that there are people who are evolved and educated enough on the issue who have read the previous history of like why this went wrong before, like last time, because the idea was that white people were the chosen people. They were the premium. Their schools were the premium, the most valued part of public education. So if we could shut down the black schools in the black neighborhoods, get kids out of the ghetto and get them into the shiny, bright suburban schools or magnet schools, that whiteness would rub off on them and they would become privileged like the white people because they were rubbing elbows with the white people. Yeah. Everybody says it's the only thing that ever worked, and there's not a bigger lie in academia today. There's and people can send me all the books that they want. And what I'm going to tell you is how'd that work out? And they won't ever be able to tell me what the force was, if it was working so well, what the force was that stopped it from working so well. There was this golden age. There never was a golden age. There was never a time where the majority of kids were integrated. There was never a time where it was durable or lasted for very long. It was always fluid. You would start integrating and white people would start leaving. Entire white Detroit left, right? They left because of desegregation. They didn't just leave the schools. They left the city without a tax base, right? And then Detroit became what? Poor, because all that tax base went with them out and built suburban schools and built suburban houses and tract homes. So
and I'm gonna argue. And again, I can't prove this. I can just see glimmers of it in conversation. But I'm going to argue that there is some motive in white people that, in the good sense of the word, like white guilt. Like I think we understand that we screwed that up, and in the lifetime. And this is one of the things that's been screwed up in the lifetime of my parents, right? I mean, my parents, my wife's parents, that generation went to desegregated schools. And so it's something that we can try to fix. And I don't mean it in the way this podcast is talking about trying to fix something that's none of our business. I mean, it's something that just something we can do. I think there are white people that are just looking for something to do, like, because they want to help. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I wonder how much power they have. I mean, listen, let me not act like I don't know people like that. So here locally in the Twin Cities, there is a group that's it's a chapter of a national group called Integrated Schools. And it was started by Courtney McKitton in Los Angeles, who was a white parent who on purpose put her two boys into the local school, the assigned school, and didn't do what liberal families in LA do all the time, which is do all the kind of administrative jujitsu to keep their kids out of the wrong school. So they went I think it was 2 or 3 white boys went to a school where the majority of all the kids were Latino and black. And it's not like, I can't even say she didn't have a problem with it, because she would be offended by that statement of why should there even be a problem? Of course not. Right. Listen, get over yourselves, just go. So she started an organization, just a chapter there of this organization of other white parents who were like-minded. And then now they have chapters in different states. And one chapter here in the Twin Cities are very, I think, educated. I won't say well-intentioned, because that's usually derisive. They're properly intentioned. They have the right intentions for doing what they're doing, and they're realistic. They're saying, look, we don't have all the answers. We don't know everything. We just know that we've been doing things wrong for a long time, and we don't want to participate in that anymore. What I said to them, I met with them in person, and what I said to them was, you're going to be outnumbered. you're going to be shouted down by the better organized, wealthier parents who don't want boundaries changed, don't want school programs moving out, don't want too many kids of color in their buildings, and they're going to beat you up. And I have to say, they're holding their own right now. But the truth is, the other team, if I were looking at white people as teams, the resistance team
that's fair.
is more powerful and better organized, and they make it rain. They make it rain in a way that like the good people don't. I don't know if that's wrong to say, but it seems to bear itself out in all of these conversations.
Yeah. So let's go back to the podcast and the school in New York and the kind of racist underpinnings of that sentence, that the only thing that's going to fix the black and brown achievement gap is white kids. And that's basically what she says. I don't remember how she put it. Also, somebody on the comments I saw said that was Natalie Wexler writing in Forbes, which I think that sounds right. So Natalie Wexler writes kind of a non angry critique of this, because Fox just wrote, they had quoted Ted Cruz just saying racism from the New York Times. Like, that's not really a thoughtful critique of the podcast. So yeah, let's go back to that sentence and that the racist underpinnings of the fact that black students need these white kids to come in and fix things, and the podcast is predicated on the fact that the white parents did it wrong, right? And it seems to me that where we're headed in the podcast is they're going to tell us the right way for white parents to come in and fix schools, right? I mean, isn't that how it seems to you, like we've got to get there?
I wonder where they're going with it. I don't know for sure, because I mean, they started out so strong on this course, like the wrong thing. And it kind of feels like it started where Nicole Hannah-Jones was in her This American Life, with the parents that were coming down. And no, these parents aren't actually, this is different. The parents in Nicole's thing were really hostile. They were coming up to the mic saying hella racist things about not wanting those St. Louis kids to come into the building. These parents actually are different. They actually discovered a school in their neighborhood that had empty seats that white people weren't going to, and they kind of said, why? I mean, why wouldn't we do this? So this is a little different. I don't know where they'll go with it, because this feels like so new. It feels like at the end of, at least I've listened to the first and second episode, and it feels the way that it ends, they're still in the bad place. So I'm wondering where they could go from here. So what I do appreciate about it, and let's kind of throw aside, and we come back to that conversation of like the racist underpinnings of integration being the only solution for a black child, which is demonstrably a terrible sentence and incredibly racist. But what you asked me at the beginning, like what resonated with this, or what did I find like true or something, and what you just kind of nailed on it is that these white parents, they already lived there, right? They didn't move across town. They didn't like rezone something, and I've seen that in Atlanta. They didn't bus all their kids across to a school that would accept them. This is a school in their neighborhood, and they had empty seats, and they all decided to go. That in and of itself was good, fine. I mean, like it was like you said about your the person you knew, and was it LA with the Latino students? It wasn't admirable or good. It was just what should happen, right? There's empty seats. Let's send our kids there. It's what happens after that when they go in and they start tripping over themselves, drawing these fences around their kids, right? With this French program that centers their children and kind of excludes the rest. Did that strike a chord with you? I mean, how so?
I just thought it was so, like, again, it was one of the things that didn't strike me until she said it. But like the thought that all these kids came from this like school that already had a French program, right? And so they came in all like with their French knowledge already, clearly the French program's for them, right? And surrounded by the other 30 kids in the middle school with fifth grade class are black and brown. They speak mostly Spanish at this school. They said 10% of them speak Arabic or something.
That's right.
And the thought that they to do a dual immersion program and choose French, which all the white kids already had that strength, right? Instead of choosing Spanish or Arabic, which would have actually made more sense in the neighborhood and the school, just struck me as this, like, again, I didn't catch it till she said it, but it was so kind of the reifying nature of whiteness, right? Like white people already have the privilege, and then they move into the school, which is, that's in and of itself a neutral thing, because if they're zoned for the school, why not be there? But then they create a way to reify their own children and their own gifts and exclude. You speak Spanish? Oh, that's not valued here. Like, French is valued here, you know?
I mean, this is a great point. I mean, because if it wasn't white centered and they wanted to move in and they wanted to create an immersion program, like you just said, they would have started a Spanish immersion, or they would have started an Arabic immersion, and the kids who were already there would have had a leg up, or would have had actually some social capital, because they would have already been in possession of that language. And what happened instead was the Eurocentrism kicked in, and we want our kids to have a French because they've already had it, and we want them to stay lovely. We want them to remain being powerful. And that played out. That played out in the way that they were having a play, and they had a girl who speaks Arabic who didn't know the French, and the white kids were kind of like, "That's okay, we'll just say your line for you." I mean, what a disempowering thing! But those think about that little interaction.
Yes, no. And think about that played out.
Yeah, figure out how they play out
over the year, over the course of their middle school career. That little sixth grade white boy she interviewed, do you know what I'm about to say? She caught up with a couple sixth grade boys. She was talking about how the narrative in the school was like, she could feel it from the upperclassmen that the white kids, they're here, and they get away with whatever they want to get away with. I mean, whether that's true or false, like, that's how those kids felt, right? The 11th and 12th graders felt that, oh, these white kids are here, and they're in charge, they're important, we're not, etc. But she interviewed those couple sixth grade boys, and the sixth grade boy said this is the exact quote. I got it from somewhere, I don't remember. He said, "This used to be a bad school, but we turned it around. Now it's a top choice. Its status has changed." And the thought that this little 11-year-old boy feels that his presence turned this school around, it's just like that girl that speaks Arabic being denigrated in the school play. Like it gives power to the white girl who helps her with her French. This little boy has power now, right? Like, he thinks it's in his control to turn a school building around. The white kids are here now, and he feels it. He said it, and that's his narrative now.
I think you just hit the nail on such a big head. That feeling in white people that they are the premium, that they are the gold standard, that they are the chosen ones, that they are the magnet power, that you have to lure us to your school. You have to pay a white tax if you want us there. The white tax comes with all the stuff you have to buy and all the accommodations you have to put in a school if I'm going to come here. And if you want me to use my whiteness to make it great. And that, my friend, is exactly the reason why it's so easy for people to sell white people integration stories. Even if they're not going to participate or do anything about it, they're going to read it, they're going to feel good because they read it, and they're going to forward it to friends, and they are still going to be the same people that they were yesterday, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and 50 years ago. And somebody is going to be dumb enough to tell us as people of color to keep waiting for, like, not just one thing to fix, like, okay, so there's one problem when you guys just leave. There's this white flight. Okay, that's one problem. But then you come back and you gentrify. Right. Well, goddamn, which can it be? Can we have you guys in a way where you don't do either of those? Don't just abandon when you don't get what you want. Don't come back and gentrify it and try and remake everything into the white image for yourself because your kids are so precious. Would it be a way to have a soft footprint? Would there be a way for white people to integrate with a soft footprint and not completely rework a school for their own kids' needs?
I read somebody wrote, oh God, where is he? He wrote something really interesting. It was in Psychology Today. I didn't catch the name, but you could Google it. The guy wrote, this series left me wondering whether it's possible for white parents to return to public schools without exercising their privilege. And if that answer isn't a clear yes, can public education ever really soar? And again, I throw out the like kind of privileging of whiteness there, but hit what you just like comport that with what you just said. Like, can white people walk back into a building softly? Like that was a great phrase, like with a soft footprint. It made me think about, I was listening to somebody was talking to somebody. It was a black woman and a white woman, and they were talking about church. It was a podcast, and the black woman said something like, "What we don't need right now is a bunch of white people coming to our churches." Mm-hmm. Like, now, is there a white family in my church? Are there a couple white families? Of course there are, but they've been there forever, and we all trust them, and they're there. I mean, they're part of the fabric. But if y'all just like start coming into our church right now, like because you feel bad about George Floyd or whatever, this was a couple months ago, I heard this, like that's not a solution. And implicit in that is what you just said. You're not going to come in softly. Like a bunch of white people aren't going to walk into a black church and like just be. They're gonna be that elephant in the room, right?
Yeah, I feel like in the podcast, one of the school workers knew that ahead of time before the white people came. When she heard that they were raising money, she was suspicious. She was like, when you start doing that, we know what comes after that. Like you're going to start making decisions, and that's exactly what happened. She was exactly right.
Well, that was again with your two PTAs, you weren't surprised, but even listening to it again today, I was surprised by that first PTA meeting when it's like the head of the PTA the year before and this year is a Puerto Rican woman. I cannot remember her name. And she is sitting in a PTA meeting, and the principal all of a sudden tells her that, oh, this white parent over here that didn't go here last year but goes here now has raised $30,000 or something. And the PTA president had never heard of this white parent or heard of him trying to raise money or had any clue that this money was being raised. And immediately, like the podcast just went tense, and the room went tense, and the reporter said the room was just miserable from then on because it was just this like tension over this resource. Like, well, are these our resources? And the white guys were like, yeah, but they're not really, because they're for the French program, and the French program has a bunch of white sixth graders in it. So, like, it was terrible. Like, it was just,
well, I mean, it was really shady in this way, in that they hired their own fundraiser, and he went out and fundraised in the name of the PTA, of which none of these people had been a part of.
Right.
So the white parents were having a separate meeting that the PTA didn't even know about. And the treasurer of the PTA was like, y'all raised some money on, well, where's that money going to go? Can we get microscopes with it? And can we get some stuff for the gym for it? I was like, no. We raised this money really for our kids. But we did it in the name of the PTA. And maybe we should just have a separate group. I thought that was just, it
didn't take them long. It didn't take them long to get to that second group, did they?
No.
That reminds me back to like the soft foot, like the same thing with this white and black church that I heard the other day. Like, there was a white parent. The co-head of the PTA was white, right? But she had been there the years before, and there was a little piece with her in the middle where she was like, "Yeah, I don't know about these new white people." Like it's not. There's that soft footprint. There's a way to do this, but 70 white kids coming in on top of 30 black kids or black and brown kids, like, that's not soft. There's nothing soft about that.
No, you mentioned church twice now, or 2 or 3 times. And I had friends that were church planters. So that was their job, to help people plant churches. And there are church consultants, actually, who tell you don't build diverse churches. They literally tell you that homogenous churches are the strongest, and that they're the most durable and they're the longest lasting. So these are people that are planting churches in the name of Christ, supposedly, who are basically telling you, if you want a long-lasting church, build a homogenous one. Not that any race is bad, just that it should just be one, like a single race church.
That's back to that bliss point you were talking about with neighborhoods or with schools. Like if your church is 5% black, you're cool, right? If you're a white guy, if it's 10% black, you're cool. If it's 13% black, you're cool. But if it's 15% black, you're not cool all of a sudden, right? Yeah. And the same thing on the other side. Like with a black church, if 10% of it's white, that's not really enough to like make it attractive to white people, but it works the other way down. Like the same thing with churches, with neighborhoods, with schools. Like there's this invisible like hand pushing in directions.
The producer of this show said that kind of part of the impetus for her was that, her own kid was going to have to go to school. So she was going to have to look at schools, and she's covered education for a long time. And it seems like this was the first time that she really considered the extent to which white power, the power of the white parent is the power in public education. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, did you really just learn that? Did you really just think about this because your kid is about to go to school? And if so, what's wrong with you? And what's wrong with all these college educated people? What's wrong with all the people who are going to listen to this podcast and feel like it's the first time that they heard some of this, or it's presenting to them something revelatory?
But and we've talked about this before, like you're ignoring the extent to which white people grow up in a bubble of literal ignorance, and just that we are raised colorblind and we're raised post-racial, and everything in society for a long time pointed in that direction. From a white point of view, I'm not saying that it wasn't there. It just like it felt like it was headed there. And then we had our wonderful 8 years with Obama, where everything was validation that we were done with race, and we're ignorant. We grow up that way, and it's not. You're underestimating.
Okay. Well, let me challenge that just a little bit. There is a point in which you could just be on autopilot, and you're not watching and paying attention to any of that stuff. And then you go to buy a house, or then you go to look at schools. And the research basically says the darker the school, regardless of the test scores. Yeah. So you have some high performing schools that are mostly kids of color that parent white parents routinely, because they're trying to consciously or unconsciously keep social distance between their kids and out-group children. Yeah. Right. So they want their kids to grow up around in-group children. There has to be a point, I don't care how liberal or conservative you are, that in your mind that you're passing up that school, not because of any other reason than it's a black school or it's a brown school or it's a black and brown school. And you can't think of your daughter not having little white girls to be around or whatever. That has to go through your mind that you're doing that, right?
Yes, but it's couched in this term of like, it's the same way, like, God, for how many years was interracial marriage? Is obviously, it was legal, right, from 1969 or whatever forward. But for how many years was it like majority unpopular? And the reason always was, you just don't want to put that on the children. Like I'm fine with interracial marriage, but you don't want those biracial babies. Like they're gonna have such a hard time. Right. So people were for the legality of it, but they were always against it in their own lives, right? Mm-hmm. Their friends, families, sons, and daughters. I think that's the same thing. Like it nobody thinks, oh, this neighborhood's mostly white, and that is better because XYZ racism. What they think is this neighborhood's mostly white, and that's just easier. It's better. It's the way like white kids grow up with white kids, and they'll know black kids. There's a couple of black kids over there. Everything's good. It's a similar effect. I think. I can't prove that, but I will.
Do you think that anybody will ever listen to this idea that I think there's a lot of things that people of color don't say in mixed company, and that they don't talk about in mixed company. And I think integration is like one of those things where a lot of the intelligentsia of the black people like to have these public intellectual conversations about that or whatnot, completely against what black people say in private, right? Black people in private are deal makers. They know we have to make a ton of trade-offs when we're thinking about schools. Culture, academics, fit. Do we trust it? Is our kid going to be isolated racially but become very smart academically? There's all these trade-offs that people talk about. I never hear people except for white people, really itching for integration. Like that's the thing. Like that. Oh my God, I can't believe that we're still segregated. Saying that privately when they're choosing schools for their kids. They do the same thing though. You get a little bit of money and you move to some bougie place, but I think people often forget that there are black suburbs where like not all black people are poor and failing, first of all. Yeah. Let's just start there. And not all successful black people are living around white people, right? There are like black enclaves where everybody's driving a Mercedes-Benz, right? And they're not like super wealthy. They're like upper middle class with government jobs in some cases. Like, DC is a good place to see some of this.
Well, and there's whole suburb bands of Atlanta that are overwhelmingly majority Black, upper middle class. I mean, like very successful areas, like
successful people, not all downtrodden.
Right? Correct.
Yeah. But I wonder what it would take for people to start on the white side to start listening to themselves when they're praising integration, if they would listen for the white supremacy in what they're saying. Like how insulting really their love of it is. I think it's very hard because there are people of color who keep selling them that story and giving them license to continue thinking that they're the gold standard.
Yeah.
And that like whiteness is the gold standard, and that the white child is the gold standard, and that peer effects without a white child are all terrible. And like a whole bunch of even middle class Black people being together without a white kid there is still wrong. It's just not good. Nobody says that for all the schools across America that are super white. It's something I say over and over and over again. No one goes to Idaho and says, you guys need some Negroes in these schools if you're going to learn, right? Like nobody says that. You know why? Because that would be a flip of the white supremacy. That would make Black people seem like they have some value. Anyways, it's a long-winded question. The question basically wrapped up in that is, are we ever going to get to a place where people at least consider on the white side that they need to get rid of the white premium, the idea that their kids are the chosen ones?
And that, I mean, that's a whole conversation that to go back to that term white savior that I just want to, I mean, we can push that off to in the abstract to another week. But we've got to, Chris. I mean, we like white people have got to divest themselves of this notion that we're better, and it's buried like so deep in us that we don't even know it's there. I was at a training today, virtual training. I'm starting school teaching in, I don't know, not next week, the week after, but we're all virtual until further notice. And so we're on a virtual training, and it was on racism, implicit bias. And my principal, who is Black, was leading the training, and she started by talking about using the word racism. And I noticed that mostly it was people of color speaking and not white people. The staff's about 50-50, it seems to me. This is my first year in the school. And then she switched from talking about racism to talking about implicit bias. And all of a sudden, all the white people like bubbled up out of the woodwork, because we are really good talking about implicit bias. We love to talk about bias implicit because that's not our fault. And then the conversation switched back to racism later. And everybody, like all the white people, just kind of like snuggled back down. And that's the leap that we've got to make, is that we are biased. We're implicitly biased. Yes, but that leads to race and racism and effects of racism that we call structural racism or systemic racism. And buried deep in that is this what you just said, is this notion that we're better, right? That's what bias is at its gut. And we're comfortable talking about bias, but like at its gut, it's just us thinking we're better and you're worse. That's what it means to be biased against something. And I don't know. White people they're not ready for it, Chris. I mean, but I saw it today just in slow motion. It was like, as long as it was a surface conversation about, we all have bias, and that bias can lead us to send a kid to the principal, even though they weren't all that bad, until we get to that next level of that bias makes me think I'm better than that kid because of his skin color. Like we are a little lost.
Yeah, I think that's a great advertisement for segregation. Like, we should keep our kids away from your guys' kids. Like to the extent that that people are still going to be holding supremacist ideas, like, which they are. Even the nice white people. I love the title of this, the nice white people.
But that's what we've done. I mean, that's what the we, I don't know who we is. That's what the system did. The devil, like whatever you want to blame, like it turned white supremacy into a guy with a hood or a flag or a swastika, and it made him a demon and made him evil. And we're not that. So we we don't have notions of white supremacy inside us, and we do. That's what it is to be American, is to like be raised to think that white people are better. And some people escape it better than others depending on where they how they grew up. I mean, I'm gonna throw to you. I doubt. I mean, you in your upbringing would have received those same messages, right? That white people are better. That was something you had to push back against. You had to fight. You had to unlearn in some way, right? I mean,
it's powerful too, because it comes to you through media, and like when you're a kid, there are just things that you love, like comic books and superhero movies and Saturday morning television. And in those things, there was a consistent message that the white guy was always the smart one. Yeah. The white guy was always the leader of the crew, was always the, and the foil or the comedic relief was often the person of color. Mr. T was on the A team. Yay, we got one on the A team. But he's the pity a fool part of the A team. He's not the brains of the operation. He's the brawn of the operation.
He was the dope. Didn't they have to knock him out every time they took a helicopter ride? Wasn't that like part of the,
like he was afraid of some things? Yeah, he was like the beast that had like a vulnerability of some sort and whatnot. But I mean, I don't think people know that you, as a child, you absorb things and you're collecting those, and eventually you have internalized racism.
Yeah.
Right. This is the best thing about white supremacy. It's like in our last show, I called it a self-cleaning oven. It's a self-cleaning oven. It never gets stained. It can do anything and get away with it. And it has a rationale for everything that it ever does. Even when it harms people to death and kills people or whatnot, there's a good rationale for why it is and why it happened. But internalized racism is a real beast. Man, talk about like the COVID before COVID. Like if you can just implant self-hatred into other people. And that's why we keep coming back to this thing around integration and the conversation that people are having. I actually think that that's meant to continue the internalized racism. That's meant to make us think that all of our fortunes are tied to white people, like, and prevent us from actually thinking for ourselves, teaching ourselves, starting schools for ourselves, developing pedagogy for ourselves, testing and assessing our own kids for what we think they can do, just like they did before 1954, right? Just like Black educators did before, and develop Black educational capital, because in this country, in a capitalist country, you don't win by integrating, you win by getting capital. That's just, and everybody knows that. The Chinese figured that out. The Italians figured that out. Everybody figured it out. Without capital, you are nothing in the United States. And capital in the United States has become white, mostly white. And we are told to integrate. We're not told to build things where maybe you guys would see it as valuable and come to us for it, right? There are whole races and groups of people that were previous marginalized minorities who have a foothold in some form of capital in the United States that white people have to respect. It isn't about integration. No one's telling people to shut down Koreatown in LA. Nobody's telling anyone to shut down Chinatown in any city. They're not. No one's telling anybody that they should shut down Chinese restaurants and just have restaurants, so they're not doing it.
So let's ask this. So let's say that we were offered something in 1954 that Black people had fought long and hard for, and white people really, really royally screwed it up. I mean, I was watching a video of Ruby Bridges today. Like, it's just horrific watching those images of those children integrating schools all over the South. Horrific. And let's say that we are now, the stat is, we're more segregated now than we were in 1962 or something, or whatever it is. Let's say that there is some combination of white saviorism, but also some combination of what I'm positing, that there's some white people that, like, they're not trying to save anything. They're just trying to undo a historical evil that our parents were complicit in. Not throwing my parents under the bus. I'm just naming generations. What do we do, Chris? It's as foolish to say, I don't want to call you foolish, but it's as foolish to say, like, oh, we just let the schools be separate, as it is to say, oh, we just got to get all the white teachers out for the Black kids. I mean, 50% of public schools are Black and brown kids. Like, we're not going to replace them all, right? So, like, what do? We can have small local examples where Black and brown schools are segregated and have excellent teachers, whether white or black, and shine. But what do we do on a large scale, like, or even a medium scale? I'm asking you.
I mean, you could keep trying to pass policies that you think engineer the outcome that you want, and you can keep passing policies that you think. Right? Well, I mean, when you talk about scale, first of all, let's just start with some basics. Scale is a very Western idea. It's a very American idea.
Okay.
So how do you scale is like one of the first damaging questions in education, because the thing that education scales the most is failure and inequity.
Okay.
And they're very good at it, super efficient. Every school district in the United States has figured out how to scale inequity, how to get all the good teachers in the white classrooms and how to get all the bad teachers in the black classroom, and to make it look like it was magic. Like, we don't know how it happened in Detroit and in Los Angeles and in Birmingham and everywhere else, blah, blah, blah. We just don't know. It's weird. It's a weird. So first thing is, when you say scale, I think people are always chasing scale. Like, what can we do big to make big change? I think that's smart. I think that's what you're supposed to want. It just seems like it's folly in education. It seems like every time education tries to do something big, top down, it eventually falls to crap. Desegregation was one of those things.
Let me sidebar just to say that for years, my criticism of charter schools, when I was 13, 14 years ago, when I was a young teacher, my criticism of charter schools was always that they weren't scalable. The way I saw them operating in Atlanta, and I've come to some place where I've been like, well, who cares if they're scalable or not? Like, it's working in those, certain schools work, certain schools don't. But like, whether that model's scalable or not, it's working in what it's doing. So I really appreciate. I'm interested in you pointing that out, and I want to come back to talking about that notion of scale, because I've seen that play out. So, but go.
Well, and I think actually people need to start thinking about the diseconomy of scale, right? So there's a point at which, like, everything operates on scale. If we put more kids in a building, we can have more programs, right? Except for the research that tells you white kids do better in super big schools, like the big suburban high schools that are 16 kids or 1,600 kids, and that black kids are exactly the opposite in the research. They do better in small schools, right? So what do you do then when scale is telling you, but yeah, if you had 1,600 kids, we can have like jazz band and everything else.
Well, and it's cheaper to run a 1,600 person school than to run an 800 person school, or to run two 800 person schools.
But there's a diseconomy to scale at a certain point. There's a certain point. So people keep trying to scale things. Anyways, I don't want to get too lost on scale, but I do think that
let's go back. So let's throw out like wacky policy engineering as a solution to segregation.
Okay, we're not going to do that anymore.
We're not going to do that. Like that, like there's enough headwind, tailwind to mess that up. So let's just talk about, and let's go scale out. All right. And let's just talk about like individual parents. And let's go back to that phrase you used with a soft footstep or something. Like what should we be doing? Go.
And when you say we, you mean white parents?
But white and black parents. I mean, like,
black parents actually need to start practicing collectivism and staying amongst themselves and creating their own solutions, because the problem with most of the solutions offered to black people is that they're not devised by black people. So that's something we have to just get over, just if for no other reason, to change the power imbalance, that black people need to start being responsible for their own educational interventions and start working together. And the good news is that they actually already are. It's an underreported story. It's happening in every city. It's been happening. So like the hidden stories in black community are legend, because I don't know why no one wants to cover them, but it's already happening to some extent. Like word of mouth amongst the black population in terms of schools and programs and everything is very strong. Like it's stronger than almost any other form of communication when you're trying to market a school or you're trying to market things. But I think actually this is the rub between the integrationists on the people of color side and the people who are more nationalists on the people of color side, is that there's a battle of wills. Because when you say, what should we do? I think the constant push to integration, that we should integrate is preventing us from developing the capital that we need to be successful on our own. And it's also asking us to believe in a premise that's never been true. It's actually telling us there's going to be this point at which white people have some revelation and they put down their white power and they stop using their white power on behalf of their kids to engineer the systems to their own advantage. They're going to stop doing that at some point. That's the weirdest thing to try and sell people of color after 400 years. So it's kind of like, if it came, I would praise God and think, oh my God, this is amazing. But I don't think it's coming.
So I read somebody on Real Clear Politics was criticizing this, and they wrote, criticizing nice white parents, and they wrote, racial reconciliation is yesterday's goal. Today's is reparations, which doesn't just mean a check from the government, but also means personal sacrifice of jobs, money, and other tangible things. And his point, this is a conservative writer, his point was just like, nobody's going to do that. Like reparations from the government is one thing people aren't going to let happen, but they're also like personal, like the thought that like white people en masse are going to like lay down XYZ privilege or power is what you just said.
This is why I like the conservatives more than I like liberals, progressives, because like Dr. King warned us and like Malcolm X warned us, it's the liberals that we have to watch out for because they're liars. At least conservative people are straight up about what they are and what they're going to do. Liberals are lying to themselves first, and then they're lying to us second. And they are maintaining power within their world by also looking like they're not holding that power, like looking like they're like really for everybody. And I know that's a harsh thing to say, but let's just
it's okay.
Let's just, break it down. Bottom line is, if white people wanted to be the soft footprint people, wanted to be people who said, let's do integration again, and let's do it the right way this time. Last time we shut down black schools, so this time let's shut down white schools and move white kids. And last time we moved poor kids to rich kids, and this time we're going to move rich kids to poor kids because that's where the investment is needed. And if white kids are so valuable, there's nothing that will fully fund a school district like white kids coming to it. So why not do that? Let me just I'll finish by saying this. If you're not willing to do what I'm about to say, stop talking about integration.
Okay.
Find the worst performing school in your school district and put your white child in it, and get other white people to do the same. And when you get there, do not try and change the programming, the fundraising schemes, the power within the school. Advocate on behalf of the school, but not overpower those who are there. Have a soft footprint. Now, if you're ready to do that, you're amongst the true blue integrationists, and I salute you. And I'll be right there walking lockstep with you. Our steps will be like prayers together. We will do it. How many people are going to show up, Jay?
Not many.
No, two.
I'm gonna say two things. One, there's in Derek Bell's Faces at the Bottom of the Well. One of his thought experiment chapters is this fascinating story about all the white kids in a town wake up and they're going to the black school, and all the black kids in the town wake up and they're going to the white school. And he just like kind of plays out in like almost science fiction, like the chaos that would ensue. All the black kids and how like they've never seen desks like this, they've never seen textbooks, and all the white kids like immediately like civil action and the lawsuits. And it's a fascinating read if anybody's interested, because you kind of talked about that, but what Derek Bell wrote about that, it was just really fascinating. So two, I will say that this is like a real personal thing for me, because my daughter is about to go to a middle school. She's about to be virtual, but at some point, her middle school, which at some point, hopefully she will walk inside, maybe 2021 or 2022, is less than 10% white. Let's just put it that way. I don't know the exact numbers. I haven't looked them up recently, but and we have lived across the street from the school for 15 years now, and there was never really much of a question other than that we were just going to go to the school, and it's been 90% black and brown the whole time, and it hasn't changed all that much, the white population. And so this notion of integration and like soft footsteps, and what is, I don't know, what's our role there. And I don't mean role in fixing it. That's not what I mean. I just mean like to me, it was like you said earlier, like this is always where we're going to go to school. I'm not rich and we weren't going to move. So this is the school we were going to go to. It's 3/4 of a mile from our house. And so, and now we're here, and now she's going there. And since we moved into this house, I've developed a little bit of an obsession with reading and writing about race. So I'm really interested in this from a social science point of view. So we can talk more.
I actually should say, someone should do a separate story on the good white people. This podcast that we're talking about is the nice white people.
Right.
And living in Minnesota, where we coined nice as we have the trademark on nice. Minnesota nice is like a thing. And Minnesota nice will kill your black ass. Like literally will kill your black ass. And Minnesota nice is not something that we want to export. But the good white people, let's just stick with this for a second. I have rarely been to a school that's 100% black or brown or black and brown. There's always 1%. I will visit very black schools or very of color schools. I don't do this anymore, but in my time of visiting schools, and there would be that couple of white kids. And I would always wonder, how did you get here? What made this okay with your parents? Please explain to me how this works like this, because they're just there and there's no problem with it and whatever. And I think we should study them, because for some reason there's always like a handful of white kids in very black schools, and you got to wonder how their parents are just okay with it.
Or if their parents are just okay with it. I mean, the question is like, what are there students there? Do they graduate from there? Like I taught at a all black school for 14 years. And when I say all, I mean like 98%. And we had 3 white kids in the building in that entire 14 years. 2 of them were from overseas and didn't make it 6 months before they moved.
Okay.
And one of them was adopted by a black mother and had a black sister in the school. So I mean, those are the 3 white kids that I saw. So,
and then you ended up with 1 out of the 3. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So,
my hope is actually, I think people listening to this honestly should look up Integrated Schools, the national group. There's a group in DC called Kindred, who I met the leader of Kindred a couple years ago, and I was very impressed. And it really helps privileged families have a soft footprint in schools and be collaborative in schools and do it the right way. Integrated Schools, the national organization and the local chapters, I think is focused on doing it the right way. But I do have to say, like, white people need to check each other, and people of color need to check white people in the integration discussion to check. When people start talking and virtue signaling about integration, the question of where do your children go to school and how did you choose it should be very important in that discussion to separate the real people from the non-real people, right? And when I say the right way to do it would be to shut down white programs and white schools and ship those kids to schools that need them and need their per pupil income, that is the first just way. Like, if you wanted justice in how we do it this time, the just way to do it would be to move white kids to the places where they're needed, where their per pupil revenue is needed, where their social capital is needed. And then once they're there, their parents should have a commitment to not trying to reorder the entire world to their own kids. And then you're a true integrationist in 2020.
Right. So what we need to come back to is I don't know how to go about that happening. So because it's a big policy. So maybe tonight's not the night, but like I would like to come back to like the individual action a white parent could make to be a soft footprint. So I'm just gonna
wait a second now. What's wrong about finding the worst performing school in your city and enrolling in it? That seems like the most concrete of first actions.
Yeah, that's something that could happen. I mean,
look at the schools in your city that you would think are the most in need of your per pupil revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, I bet you those schools are closer than you think to your own house. White people travel to get out of certain schools.
Sure.
Right. Like, so if I don't know, I don't think there's any magic bullet that's going to make everybody do the right thing at any given time. But a concrete step would be to stop talking about integration and start integrating. And when you do it, when you physically do it, to be careful about how you exist wherever you go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you get into a building, I've seen this happen. There's a school called Washburn in Minneapolis. There was a principal there that spent a long time trying to put programs in for their student body that was the student body that was all of color. And we changed the boundaries and we made white parents, half of the white parents from one of the Tony schools come to that school. And when they got there, they got the principal fired. They got rid of honors for all. So now all of a sudden the kids that were in honors before didn't qualify for honors anymore. And the honors became all white, but it was the quickest transformation of a building you've ever seen in your life. And that to me is the integration all wrong. Some of those parents wrote to the school board exactly, we're the type of parents that you don't want to lose, so don't piss us off.
Yeah.
Right. They just were so bold about it. So anyways, I don't know. We got to check out soon here. But to wrap at the end, answer your own question. You tell me what you think maybe could be something that people could do. I feel like my answers are unsatisfactory. So tell me what you think.
No, I don't know. Niceness isn't going to work. And white savior is not going to work. I don't know. I mean, we're way late in the game to start talking about this. It's like so mixed up in like housing patterns too, that like, is the right answer to move? Like, it might be, but I'll answer your question next time.
Okay, next time we'll talk about this because it will probably, by that time we'll have probably 2 more episodes of this to actually keep listening to and talking through. On your last point just now, let's come back to that. I think that could be a story about in gentrifying places, which is damn near everywhere.
Right.
You have the opportunity for once to do it the right way for only a small window of time as places are gentrifying. And maybe that would be a place where you could start some organized, like, please go to the regular school. Don't move here and buy your little condo and fix it up and then, make some weird decision. Anyways, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you spending an evening talking about these things and let me badger you with questions about white people.
All I want to do, Chris. I wish we'll fix it next time.
All right. We're going to change the world next time. To everybody listening and watching, we appreciate you as always, for sure. If you have any questions, comments, or anything that you can add to this or resources, please go ahead and still put it into the comments even after we're gone. We can see them and read them. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great night. And look out for tomorrow's Citizen Ed broadcast in the morning, 9 o'clock Central Time. It will be a very special one.